All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're not just talking about the history of a language. Nope, we are diving into one of the most incredible stories of cultural engineering you'll ever hear. We're talking about how the Hebrew language was, for all intents and purposes, rebooted. And this whole idea of looking at language as a system, as a kind of code, is exactly what we love to do here at Staiblocks. We're all about breaking down complex systems, whether it's an AI, math, or like today, the very operating system of human communication. So that brings us to the big, almost impossible sounding question. Can you actually take a language that's considered dead, one that nobody speaks as their mother tongue, and bring it back to life? Well, the answer, amazingly, is yes. But, and this is the kicker, it has only happened once, on this scale, in all of human history. That alone tells you just how extraordinary this story really is. And just how big was the challenge? We're talking about 1,700 years. For nearly 17 centuries, Hebrew wasn't the native language for anyone, anywhere. Think about that. No kids learning it at home, no one using it at the market, silence. So the way we're going to frame this is by thinking of the language as a system. A complex operating system that crashed, had its core data, its source code, meticulously saved, and was then deliberately and successfully rebooted for a whole new world. Okay, so let's start with part one, the system crash. How does a living spoken language just stop being spoken? This timeline lays it all out pretty clearly. For a long, long time, Hebrew was the main language. But then you see these pressure points. The Babylonian exile introduces Aramaic, a closely related language, which starts to become a big deal. But the final nail in the coffin? That's the Bar Kokhba revolt against Rome. The Romans crushed it, and the Jewish people were scattered across the world. That dispersal was the critical failure. By around 400 CE, the system effectively shut down. Hebrew just wasn't a mother tongue anymore. So what filled that space? Well, it wasn't a vacuum. The language was displaced. For many, Aramaic took over as the day-to-day language. In other places, it was Greek. Hebrew didn't disappear, not at all, but it retreated from the streets and homes into very specific, protected places. Which brings us to the next crucial phase. If the operating system went down, how on earth was the data, the source code of the language itself, kept from being totally corrupted or lost? Now this is the really clever part. Think of it like a multi-layered backup strategy. The language was saved in the liturgy folder, in prayer and scripture. It was backed up on the scholarship drive, in dense intellectual texts. For business between Jewish communities that spoke different local languages, it was the written standard for contracts. And you had this constant stream of poetry and philosophy keeping the language alive and evolving. So you see, it wasn't dead, it was dormant. The core files were safe. And because those files were preserved so perfectly, the next chapter became possible. The system revival. This is where a small group of people decided to do something absolutely unprecedented: reboot an ancient language for the modern age. Every massive project needs a lead engineer, right? For the Hebrew reboot, that person was Eliezer ben Yehuda. And he wasn't just some academic. He was a firebrand, an activist, who truly believed that a modern Jewish identity needed a modern spoken Hebrew. So starting in 1881, he made it his life's work. So how'd he do it? Well, you can basically think of his strategy as a four-step algorithm. Step 1, start small. He and his wife decided to speak only Hebrew to their son, making him the first native speaker in 1,700 years. Crazy, right? Step 2, scale up. He lobbied for schools to become total immersion zones. Step 3, update the software. He knew they needed new words, thousands of them, for modern concepts. And step 4, build the ecosystem. You need newspapers, dictionaries, a whole culture to support the language. It was a brilliant, systematic plan. And this right here perfectly illustrates the challenge of that third step. I mean, the existing vocabulary was ancient. You had a word for chariot, but not for train or car. You had a word for scroll, but what do you call a newspaper or a computer? They had to engineer a whole new vocabulary, often by brilliantly adapting ancient word roots to fit modern life. So, the big question, after all that work, did the reboot actually take? Let's jump to today and look at the living, breathing system that is modern Hebrew. The result is, well, it's just staggering. Today, there are more than 9 million Hebrew speakers around the world. It went from one single native speaker, Ben Yehuda's son, to a thriving global language. It's now the primary official language of Israel. The reboot worked. But what's really cool is that the rebooted system isn't just a perfect copy of the old one. It's got updates. Take a look at the sound system, the phonology. One of the most fascinating examples is the letter resh, the R sound. In ancient times, it was probably a tapped R, kind of like in Spanish. But modern Hebrew has a guttural R, pronounced in the back of the throat. Why? Well, because many of the revival's pioneers were from Europe, and their native languages, like German and Yiddish, had that sound. So the new system is actually a hybrid, a blend of different historical inputs. So here's the bottom line. Modern Hebrew is a complete, fully functioning system. It's an official language. The vocabulary has exploded from about 8,000 biblical words to over 60,000. And there's even an official body, the Academy of the Hebrew Language, that acts like a software developer, constantly issuing patches and updates by coining new words to make sure the system never gets outdated again. Ultimately, the story of Hebrew is so much more than just linguistics. It's a powerful case study in how a culture can engineer its own revival. It proves that language, our fundamental code, is completely intertwined with our identity. And it shows that with a clear plan, a ton of dedication, and a really well-preserved backup, you can bring a system that's been asleep for centuries roaring back to life.